Okay, good morning, everyone. So in today's module, we are going to talk a little bit about units and how we pick the units in a model. And to do that, we are going to see an extension of the susceptible infectious removed model that we've discussed last week, where instead of having three categories, we are going to add a fourth that corresponds to a very simple biological hypothesis, which is that individuals are going to enter the population by being immune already. That is the case in some disease where you can you can inherit immunity from the mother, and this natural immunity is going to wane over time and is going to disappear about some period of time. So what we need to do is write an SIR model and then decide, we can add this compartment for new individuals that are not yet susceptible and that are going to become susceptible over time. So that's mostly an excuse to talk about units. So how do we pick units and how do we express the time in a differential equation as a time that is relevant on a biological timescale? So we're going to create a reaction network as last week. Reaction network. And because this is a model where there is this notion of maternal immunity, we need to add something about demography in the model. So we're going to do that in much in the same way that we've done last week by adding a parameter called mu, which is going to be the rate of demographic change in the population. So mu is going to be the rate at which individuals are born and at which they die in the population. Let's start with something before that. The first thing we want to do is, let's call this parameter lambda. And lambda is going to be the rate at which maternal immunity is lost. We are going to call the individual that have maternal immunity M. And at a rate lambda, individuals that are M, maternally protected, are going to become S, which is to say susceptible. The reason we're doing this one first is because reaction network models are going to order the name of the variables in the way they are introduced. And so we want, because M is the first stage in the model, the first compartment in which we put individuals when they're born, we want that to be the first in the model. So what's next? What's next is that at a rate beta, a contact between I and S are going to give 2I. And at rate gamma, an infectious individual is going to get removed, and let's assume, for fun, that at a rate nu, at a rate kappa, removed individual can become susceptible again. So there's no demographics yet, for a simple reason that I want to show you in a minute. So we're going to do a model here. Let's run that. Right, and then we need to add the name of the variables. It's lambda, beta, there's no comma here, gamma, and kappa. Let's run this little thing here. As a side note, last week we used the defect biological package, which is now called Catalyst, and so we're going to use Catalyst here. It has a few additional functions, nothing fundamental changes for us users, but we're going to use the up-to-date version of things. One of the things that Catalyst does, and I know last week we played with Latexify quite a bit, we're going to look at the graph of this network. It's a reaction network, so it's going to be something where things are moving back and forth between compartments. So let's have a look at what this figure says. It says there is a maternally protected compartment that through a reaction has a 1-to-1 rate of going to susceptible individuals. Susceptible individuals are going to become infectious, and it's the number of infectious individuals has an impact on this reaction. The infectious individual are going to become removed, and the removed individual can get back to being susceptible. So that's sort of, here is the compartment, and here are the reactions in which they are involved. And so this model, we could call it like MSIRS, because that is the path that an individual is expected to take over the lifetime. So that is our reaction network. Let's add some comments inside it. So this is loss of maternal immunity, and that is SIRS. And the next thing we want to do is demography. So demography is going to be at the rate mu, where mu is the demographic rate. We are going to see individual from M, S, I, and R go into something called empty set. And then at a rate mu as well, we're going to see individual from. There's a few hypotheses we're making here. Let's assume that the M compartment has no demography for no, and we'll see where we end up with that. S individual can become 2S, that is reproduction. What do we have next? We have infected individual that can become I plus S, and then we have removed individual that become R plus M. So the thing that no individual in this model is going to be born susceptible. They're going to be born with some maternal immunity. So what we are creating is not a susceptible individual, that is actually a maternally protected individual. So we can run this model again, and then we can look at the graph. But it's becoming substantially more complex here, right? And that sort of makes sense, because we now have external arrows that say, well, you can, every compartment has a rate of mortality, but what is more important is that every compartment is now creating individuals that are maternally protected. Now, the maternally protected individual, we are assuming that there is no mortality, which is the thing that we can decide that if we want to change it. The consequence is that they don't have any natality either. So we'll see what that means for the model in the end. What can we do with that? So the first thing we need to do is set some parameters, set some initial population size, and then simulate. I'm just going to do something rapidly, which is have a look at the syntax for that, because I haven't looked at Catalyst. So while I'm furiously Googling for the correct syntax to transform that into a network of differential equations, right here. It's cool. What we want to do is define some of the parameters that we have. So the parameters we need are the ones that are here, right? So we have lambda, we have beta, we have gamma, kappa, and mu. So one thing that is interesting is because these parameters are not necessarily easy to think about, right? So but what we can say is, how long do we expect that it will take on average for a specific process to happen? So let's start with the loss of maternal immunity. We can say that, well, the duration of maternal immunity is going to be 6 months. And so the rate at which it decays is going to be 1/6. And so that is going to tell us something about the model, which is that it is expressed in units of months, number of months since T0. Beta is a little bit more tricky to define. We're just going to leave this one for later. What is gamma? Gamma is the rate at which infectious individuals recover, at which you develop your own immunity. And so that is 1/, the duration of the infectious period. So we can say individuals are going to be infectious for a period of 2 units of times. Units of times here are going to be months again. So for an average of 2 months, you're going to be infectious. Kappa is the duration of immunity. So how long do you maintain immunity after you've been infectious? And so we can say that people are going to remain immune for, let's say 10 years. So it's 120 months. And mu is how many months does it take to have a generation? What is the average duration of a generation in this model? So we're going to say it's 360 months, something like that. So what is the value of beta here? Beta is a transmission. Yeah, it's a transmission parameter, and that's something that's often a little bit more difficult to estimate. But because there is this fundamental constant in models of epidemics, which is how many new cases do you actually produce as an infectious individual, we can do a little bit of mathematics to show that the value of beta is going to be gamma times this constant called R0 over n. So R0 is the number of new cases that you create as an infectious individual, and n is the population size. So we are going to fix sort of the infectiousness of a disease as being 1.2. Like on average, if you're infectious, you are going to create 1.2 individuals. And we're going to use the population size of, what did I use yesterday evening? I don't know, like 5,000. That is our population. It has 5,000 individuals. When you're born, you benefit from maternal immunity for 6 months. If you get infected, you are going to be infectious for about 2 months. This infection will last for 10 years, and a generation is taking 30 years to complete. So what we need to do now is set some initial population size. So use 0, and that is going to be, we're going to have no maternally protected individuals initially. We're going to have n minus 1 susceptible individual, 1 susceptible individual, and no immune individual. So that tracks. Okay. Let's run the simulation now that we have that. Oh, we need to wrap everything in a parameters here. So it's going to be in order lambda, beta, gamma, kappa, and then mu. So we have the parameters, we have the population size, we need a time step. A time span. And we're going to say, let's say we go from 0 months to 600 months is 50 years, I think. Yeah. That's okay. And so we are going to have our problem, which is a model. The model is called immunity. U0, T-span, and P. that is going to be the problem that we want to solve. So I just updated the differential equation package, so nothing has compiled yet. I'm also using an old version of Julia I'm using a pre-pandemic version of Julia on my lab computer. So it's not necessarily the best. And then we are going to solve that. Let's plot it. So if we do plot of the solution, what we are going to see is the behavior of the different compartments of the model over time. And it's not, it's going to be slightly different this time because we have one more compartment, which is the maternal immunity compartment. So that's our that is our model here. So what do we have? Well, let's say that after we can go up until 300 only, and then plot solve. Okay. So what we see is that there is a baseline number of individual with maternal protection in the population. So that is going to be the first compartment. We can plot it at sol 1. And that goes from 0 to about 81 individuals, 82 individuals. So that is the result of the demography in the population, right? We know that after we can express that in units of years, by the way, by dividing by 12. After 3 years, we have reached the equilibrium number of individual with maternal immunity in the population. So that in itself, it's not necessarily something that is an epidemic parameter, because maternal immunity is going to happen regardless of the fact that the disease is present. And just something that we assume is always going to be true. It's sort of what is the proportion of newborns in the population, and it's about 100 out of 5,000. So that's the first result. If we look at the number of susceptible individual over time, what we see is like this dip when there's the first epidemic, and then it increases and then it decreases again. And the variation that we see is tied into the development of immunity, and then over time, what we see here is a loss of immunity. So we had a parameter for that, which says that after 360 months, everyone that has been infectious should have lost their immunity. And so we see sort of like oscillations in the dynamics. So what do we do with this model? There's a couple of things we can do, right? We can, let's just have a look before that at the infectious compartment. So the infectious compartment, we see these little peaks over time. There's like a first epidemic peak at year 5, and then there's another a little bit after that that's a little less intense, and it's going to oscillate, and it's going to dampen over time, so there's going to be fewer oscillations, and they're going to be further apart. That's sort of the behavior that we expect. So what do we do with this model? So the first thing we can do is what if maternal immunity gets a lot longer? So what if we lose maternal immunity after a year, right? So we take the exact same set of parameters, but we change the duration of maternal immunity. So what it's going to do is have this impact on the fact that maternally protected individuals are going to increase in size, and then the peaks are going to be less intense. What if maternal immunity is very, very short-lived? A tenth of a month, 3 days. Well, then what we should see is, as we expect, that there's almost no maternally protected individual in this population at all, but then what we see is sort of the same oscillation that we had before. So what we can do here is sort of, because the units are expressed in, because the parameters are expressed in units that have some biological meanings, like months, we can play with the model a little bit. And see what that would change, and we can start thinking about when that is going to happen. So we, instead of having a model like we had in the previous classes, it was like units of population by units of time, we have something that is individual by months, or something like that. It's not necessarily something that is fundamental to the process, but it's good if you want to start bringing in empirical data. One of the examples that we will do next week is try to fit a model like that to time series. And time series, we know both the unit of measurement and the unit of time. It's going to be individual and days. So it always makes the interpretation easier when you have something that is that you can check makes sense from a unit point of view. And it's also going to be useful to check that all of your reaction rates are expressed as units of 1 over time. So over a unit of time, we're going to have that reaction. Over a unit of time, we're going to have that reaction. It's something that helps with checking the validity of the model. It's not necessarily always the case that we have access to enough measurement or we can take enough educated guesses to make us to set the value of the parameter in a unit that makes sense. A lot of models in population dynamics are just going to be expressed as n as a function of time. And what matters is the qualitative change of the behavior of the model over time. But the in some cases, like models of epidemic dynamics, it does make sense to think about what is the actual unit. We're making an assumption here, as we made last week, which is that the transmission is going to be density dependent. So the total number of infectious individuals is what matters, as opposed to being frequency dependent. So the proportion of infectious individual is what matters. The reason we're doing that is because some diseases tend to be density dependent. Think with a free living stage, for example, tend to be density dependent. Most wildlife disease, most cattle disease are usually, because it's small population, we're expecting that it's like the density dependence that matters. There's a good analogy, which is when a city grows, you can either grow by increasing the size of the city, and that would be frequency dependence, or you can grow by increasing the number of people within the same size of the city. That is going to be density dependence. There's a lot of interesting discussion about the choice of which is correct, depending on what you want to do. The size of the population we simulate is growing. It does make more sense to use density dependence. Frequency dependence, but for the moment we are going to assume that density dependence is what matters. It's also an assumption we've made in the models of population growth so far. So we're sort of keeping into this idea, but it's not the only way to do these things. Okay, so let's get back to the models. What we can see is we have defined a new compartment here. And then we have expressed the rate of transition across this compartment as a function of biological rates, units of time. One thing that is fairly useful as you will notice, is that we set the parameters here in no specific order. Like we give them here, and we put them here in the same order, but we never give the order of the variables. So every reaction network model has two methods associated to it. One is species. So if we do species of the immunity model, it's going to tell us, here's the name of the variables. The first variable is M, second is S, third is I, and fourth is R. If we had put the reaction in a different order, they would appear here in a different order. But that's important information that you will need for the third project, actually. Because when you need to give the size of the different population in the U-node vector here, you need to know which is which. And so the first position, second, third, and fourth, that is important to respect that. The second is parameters. Second method is parameters, and that is giving you the order in which you should be putting the parameters in the model. So that's something that we didn't check so far because I sort of knew what the order was, but whenever you write your model, it's a good idea to check that both the variables and the parameters are in the correct order, because if you don't, you're going to put the wrong variable in the wrong place, and it's going to give you a wrong prediction. So that is the importance of the parameters and species methods. To summarize, we have also seen the graph function, which is providing a visual representation of what the model looks like. The 1 and 2 here are, because this model is, this package is built mostly for things like chemical reactions, it is a representation of the stoichiometry of the reaction. We can still have access to the LaTeX formula if you want when using Catalyst. That being said, there's a few, there's a new twist. All right, we need to add LaTeXify and then go here and use LaTeXify. There's a little twist, which is that by default, the LaTeXify method applied to reaction network is going to give you a representation of the catalytic network. So if you want that as a system of differential equation, there's an extra step. I'm just going to load the package to show you. If we do that, it is going to give us LaTeX code that does not look like an equation. It's using a package for chemical reactions. So if we want to see the system of differential equation, we had to wrap that into a call to convert and transform that into a system of differential equation. That makes sense. No, it's a line, it's d mt over dt is all of that. So when you want to, in your third project, you'll have to write a model and you'll have to make choices about the different models. You can actually define the model as code and then in the report call the LaTeXify function to write the equation. They're not necessarily going to be the best equations you can write, meaning that you can reorder some terms or things like that, but they're going to be the exact notation that corresponds to the model that you have implemented. And so that's something that is fairly important here. Okay, so that was an overview of using the correct units for our models. We're going to take a very short break. We're going to take a 15-minute break, actually. And in 15 minutes, we're going to start again with a model that is going to be substantially more complex, where we will look at two populations that are going to be competing with one another. And then there's an epidemic that they can They're sharing some pathogen, and we're going to look at the effect of sharing a pathogen on the consequences of competition for both of the species. So we'll take a 15-minute breaks, and I will see you at, I don't know what time it is. We'll see you at 10.